title of my sermon is Impassibility and Compassion. I'm going to tell 4 stories, and I'm going to talk about those 2 things and how they relate to real life, and we'll end with Jesus, when Jesus is both impassible and compassionate. So let's start with a story. Everybody probably has a DMV story. I remember going to the DMV and standing in a line for, seemed like 10 hours, but I think it was a little over an hour. And I got up, finally up to, I was ready to do my business, and the lady told me I was in the wrong line, go over there. And I went over there and waited in line again, and finally got my business taken care of. I had one of the worst DMV photos I ever had because I wasn't really happy about that. Well, there was impassibility, but there was no compassion. No one felt my pain, no one offered to let me move ahead in line, no one was doing anything for me. The rules were the rules, I was in the wrong line, and that was it. So I just had to go start all over in another line. So that's story number 1. Story number 2 is recently I needed to go, it was an emergency trip, and I needed to fly out to visit my son in the hospital. Anyway, I was standing in the airport in a line, and guess what? Maybe this is something I do. I was in the wrong line. So I'm standing there, and then there's other people start to go. They weren't even there yet. They start to build a line. They were in the right place. And one of the ladies over there is watching me and knows that I'm there sooner. And there's the person at the cashier or whatever, the clerk, whatever we call a person at the airport that checks you in, that person. Anyway, I was standing in the wrong line, and guess what happened? The one lady, she showed compassion. She said, he was here first, let him go ahead of me. But the person that was in control there was impassibility. She said, no, he's in the wrong line. He needs to wait and go to the end of the line. Here we go all over again. This time it wasn't just impassibility. There was compassion by the other person that saw somebody, some old guy sitting over there waiting impatiently in line and had sat there and made a mistake that just probably any of us have made, standing in the wrong line, and she offered to let me go ahead. There were only 2 people in the other line, so it wasn't a lot of consequence, but the rules were the rules, and I went in the other line, and then 10 minutes later I got what I needed. This one is kind of an interesting story too. People know I have done some construction in my life, and I visited proper authorities, and I was talking to a building inspector, and I was waiting in line. I was watching the conversation that was going ahead of me. There was this gentleman, and he had a farm, and he had a farmhouse, and he had one of his laborers lived in the farmhouse. And the issue was about this one plug. There was a plug upstairs, and they were using it as a kitchen. They were heating their food on it. And somehow somebody reported it, and the county found out about it. So he was supposed to do all these improvements because now he had a kitchen upstairs instead of just a room. And the building inspector said, you've got to do this and this and this, and that's what I told you. And the farmer said, I'll just throw them out. I don't care. Before I do spend all that money for a farm worker, I'll just put them out on the street. It doesn't mean anything to me. So there was compassion by the inspector. He said, do this. Just remove the plug upstairs, and everything will be okay. So we saw 2 things going on here, maybe 3 things going on. At first, we have the impassibility of the inspector saying, these are the rules. We have the impassibility of the farmer saying, I'm not moving. I'm not going to fix this room upstairs. I'm not going to do these building improvements. But as the conversation continued, we found compassion. I heard compassion in the inspectors, and he had a solution that made everybody happy. So he began in impassion, and also the farmer began in passion. But the building inspector was moved by the plight of the person that was their home, and they would have been ejected on the street over a plug. So now we move to Jesus' story. Jesus' story is kind of similar. We have Jesus. The line is kind of a metaphoric line. It's Jesus goes and this woman is coming to him, and he's saying, you're out of line, woman. You don't belong here yet. It's not your turn. I came for the house of Israel. Right now, it's not your place. You gotta wait. But guess what Jesus does? Jesus begins in this impassioned sense that he's not feeling her pain, and these are the rules, and that's too bad. And then when she begins to beg and make this wonderful argument about why she should have compassion given to her, Jesus relents and he gives compassion to her, and he relents and heals her daughter. Why is it so astounding? Look at who the woman was. She was the wrong gender. She was a woman, which were a little more than chattel in this society. She was from the wrong religion. She wasn't from the house of Israel. And there was a thought, too, that the sins of the father or the mother, they were visited on the children. So we have this child that is tormented with a demon, probably because somebody sinned. Remember blind Bartimaeus and that whole story? So she's at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom of privileged people. And yet, Jesus begins in his impassibility. Jesus begins in his impassibility and is moved to compassion. Isn't that something awesome about God? God has structure and rules and the way things need to go, but we can talk to Jesus, and Jesus will listen to us, and he will come. If he'll come for a woman in distress, the wrong religion, with a dire need of a child, he'll come for us, even though the rules may say something different, because he loves us and he has compassion. He begins with order and passion in some sense, and then he's moved to compassion. There was one time in our history, some people like history, during World War II, that the impassibility of God was a theology that was coming back, because we needed a strong God that was far off and wasn't affected by all this mess of war and pain and suffering, and why would God not do anything? And there was a sense that it was empowering to people, having a strong God that was far away, that didn't feel their pain and didn't have compassion on them. To them, what made sense for us to have an impassionate God. Live in passion, follow Jesus, and let love rule what you do. Amen.